Welcome, everyone. Thanks for watching this Backyard Bulletin interview. My name is Daniel Senner, and I am the Community Conservation Coordinator for the Methow Conservancy. I'm sitting down over Zoom today with our longtime local Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife District Biologist, Scott Fitkin, to talk about black bears who call the Methow Valley home and the new Methow Bear Aware Project, aimed at actively reducing human black bear conflicts. Scott's great ability to distill and articulate complex wildlife topics and his love of bears make him the perfect person to talk with about one of the Methow's most charismatic but sensitive species. Scott, welcome.
Thanks.
How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty well. As I mentioned earlier, I'm a little surprised you and I agreed to do this on a Friday afternoon on the most beautiful day since last fall, but so be it.
I'd like to say that we can't predict the weather this time of year, but I'm not exactly sure that that is true.
That's all right.
Yeah. Is it a busy time at WDFW?
It is. In fact, I was in the field for the 5 days this week. A lot of our survey effort ramps up this time of year. So for instance, deer, snakes, loons, even bumblebees are on the docket a little further ahead. So it is a busy time of year.
That sounds exciting.
It is. It's one of the best times of year for field biologists.
Awesome. I know it's also a busy time for our local black bears. Can you talk us through what is happening physiologically right now with our bears and how that might influence their behavior?
Sure. So bears are coming out of the den right now. So some are probably already out. The adult males probably started coming out 3 or 4 weeks ago in a lot of cases. I saw one myself, I think 2 weeks ago to the day. And then the females come out anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks later. So they're probably right in the middle of emergence currently. And they've been in the den in a state of dormancy for 4 to 6 months, and they haven't eaten or had anything to drink or urinated or defecated for that length of time. So, they're a little groggy and they're waking up and they're realizing I'm pretty hungry. It's time to start finding food. Females that have little cubs have been a little busier. They gave birth in the den and they've been nursing their cubs now for 3 months, give or take. So they have extra need for some energetic refueling, so to speak. So they're out and about now looking for some of those early season foods.
And what type of natural foods are bears picking out on this time of year?
I would say most of their diet right now is going to be young, tender, emergent vegetation. They will scavenge carcasses, say winter-killed deer if they're lucky enough to find them, but for the most part, it's going to be like young sedges and grasses. In fact, like the bear in my background picture here, you'll see a bear this time of year out grazing like a cow on the sedges and grasses. Other things they might look for are some wetland plants that are emergent. One of the ones that I like to highlight just because it makes for a nice little jingle is equisetum, bears eat them. That's the horsetail that you find in some of the wetlands. So a variety of plant foods. I watched a bear up near Mazama last year, a female and a cub actually just nipping off all the spring beauty blooms and leaves. So
very cool.
Yeah, so a whole variety of vegetative food sources, basically.
Awesome. And how does bear behavior kind of change from spring into summer and then going into fall?
Right. So bears essentially, in one way, their behavior never changes in that they're always looking for the best seasonal food source they can find. And they do that consistently throughout the non-hibernating period. But where they go and what they eat changes. And so as things like berry crops come on, service berries typically being our first berry crop, they'll start to key in on those and move to places where they know they've been successful at finding those in the past. And they may go up and down in elevation throughout the summer following some of those seasonal food sources. So for instance, maybe it's service berries early and then they move up and feed on stuff in avalanche shoots and then come back down later for choke cherries, or just moving about the landscape, taking advantage of whatever they can. They also consume a fair amount of insect food as well. Ants, they'll even tear open yellow jacket nests and go after the larvae. So yeah.
Good on them.
Yes.
And do bears, are they territorial, or do they have more like a home range? Or
Really good question. No, they're not territorial like our cougars or our wolves. And so they're not patrolling a territory. They're just looking for those seasonally abundant foods. And so the home ranges of a lot of our bears frequently overlap. And you may get several bears even in relative close proximity if you have a rich enough food source. So for instance, I was in the Olympics several years back, many years ago now, but I watched like half a dozen bears in the same basin feeding on huckleberries late in the season. So, they're willing to tolerate each other relatively closely when food's abundant.
that'd be quite a sight.
It was, it was,
Um,
it was, it was fun.
yeah, you got your start in wildlife research on an observational bear study up in Alaska. What did you learn up there that made you so interested in the Ursus genus?
Boy, we could talk all day on that, but I think what I came back with was how intelligent they are and adaptable, and just how charismatic they are. They because they're so intelligent, they have a lot of complex behaviors, a lot of play behavior. So they're just a joy to watch. When you get the chance to sit and watch a bear do its thing, it's always entertaining.
Absolutely. And you can just tell, from the photos in both of our backgrounds, like each bear has its own unique personality that just comes through so strongly.
Thanks. I meant to say that as well. That was the other thing that really struck me is, yes, they're all individuals. They're all different, and very different personalities sometimes. Yeah.
Totally. Can you tell us about the population of black bears in the Methow Valley? Do we have any idea of their numbers, or have there been any studies?
Good question. The short answer to that question is I can only give you a very qualitative overview, which is to say we have a healthy black bear population, reasonable densities and pretty good age distribution. We've done a little bit of survey work, or not, well, yeah, we tried a little survey work years ago, but a little bit of radio collaring work back in about the mid-90s, I guess, and we learned a little bit more about their basic ecology here and some of their movement patterns. Nothing terribly out of the ordinary. I guess one thing that stood out to me was we collared a bear up the Chihuahua. I don't remember exactly which site, but late in the season, it would go all the way to the Pacific Crest to feed on huckleberries, which was quite a trek, and then come back and back and forth. So they don't have any problem moving long distances if there's a payoff.
Wow.
But
really
to
cool.
answer your question more directly, we don't really have a good population or density estimate currently. However, as luck would have it, this year we're initiating a bear hair snagging survey that's going to attempt to answer that question, give us a good kind of a representative density for the western portion of the county here. And that starts up in about a month.
Very cool. Well, I'm sure we'll all be interested in hearing about the findings of that study.
Yeah, I'm really excited because in addition to the basic data, we're going to have a remote camera up at all these hair snag sites. So, loads of fun video too.
Yeah, we look forward to seeing those as well. One thing that we do know, or that we've been hearing anecdotally, is that the Methow is having an increase in black bear garbage conflicts. Can you explain why bears getting into garbage is an issue?
Yeah, I guess in a nutshell, it's an issue because that presents potential property damage issues and even human safety issues when bears become both habituated and food conditioned, get too comfortable around people, or expecting to get some kind of a food reward. That's just kind of a recipe for disaster to some degree. And so we want to avoid that at all costs if we possibly can. And it's
Totally.
I guess, it's one thing that people don't realize is bears are what we call single trial learners. So let's say they show up at your house and they get into your bird feeder and clean it out. They now know that human residences may have bird feeders, and that's a great food source. And so not only will they come back to your house, they will potentially hit every other house in the neighborhood looking for that same food reward. And so it only takes one incident to make them a potential conflict bear. And so, it's the flip side of that is if we're able to deal with the attractant effectively and essentially remove that attractant, the bears will learn fairly quickly it's no longer available and move on. But it reinforces the idea that a fed bear is a dead bear in many cases, because when they become so habituated, oftentimes, eventually we just can't tolerate the safety risk.
Yeah. Can you speculate on some of the factors on why some of the garbage bear interactions might be increasing in the valley?
I think it's just a very simple, straightforward situation where we just have more people in the valley, more people living here, more people with second homes recreating here more often. More people with more attractants means more opportunity for bears to come and take advantage of those attractants. I think it's as simple as that. I don't think there's a whole lot from a human behavioral standpoint that's changed, or really from the bear's perspective. I think it's just more opportunity.
That makes sense. Do you know what places in the valley have been having the most bear garbage issues?
Yeah, there's certainly some hot spots, but I would preface that by saying that the entire Methow Valley is bear country, and a bear could show up at anyone's house, anywhere in the valley, even in town. And those people that have been around a while have seen bears in town. Like we took one out of a tree at the Duck Brand one time that was just sitting up there watching people eat their quesadillas. So, you just have to have the anticipation that if you live in the Methow, you could potentially have a bear at your place. But having said that, I would say the upper third of the valley, particularly say from like Weeman Bridge or Edelweiss to Lost River and then Wolf Creek Road, you tend to get maybe a higher incidence of bear conflicts in that area. And I think that's in part because the valley is relatively narrow there. The developed strip is fairly narrow, and it backs immediately up to vast areas of public land, thickly forested public land, which are really good bear habitat.
Those are all good lessons. How does Fish and Wildlife handle a bear who repeatedly gets into garbage and becomes a problem bear?
It's variable, but always the first step is to try to eliminate or remove the attractant that set up the situation in the first place. So if we remove that attractant, bears learn it's no longer available, typically they will simply move on. If for whatever reason we're not able to do that, or bears can maybe the same bear continues to visit different residences, maybe we don't stay ahead of it, or it just becomes really persistent in terms of trying to get food from humans, then typically we will remove the bear. The bear will get euthanized. We used to translocate bears more so than we do currently, but it's not a great option for a couple of reasons. One, bears have a great homing instinct and can travel long distances. We talked about how seasonally they'll move a long ways just to look for food, and you can move a bear 100 miles away and it'll still come back in many cases. And the other thing about moving a bear is, at least in the short term, you might solve your problem locally, but you may have just given it to somebody else, in whatever watershed you move the animal to. So translocation, I won't say we never do it, but it's becoming a much rarer tool in terms of how often we actually implement that.
So it's really important that we prevent the creation of these problem bears.
Correct.
And to that effect, do you have any advice for what people can do in their homes and yards to prevent bears from accessing human-sourced calories?
Sure, absolutely. And maybe again, as a little bit of a primer. So bears are omnivores, just like we are, and they eat everything we do plus stuff that we can't or don't eat. So if it smells or looks like, well, maybe not so much looks, but if it smells like food at all, they're going to at least come check it out, if not actually eat it. I've seen bears get into paint, and I'm not saying, that should be something you should worry about, but my point is, not only are they always looking for the next meal, but they're very inquisitive as well. And so they have a tendency to get into things that get left out if and when they're cruising through looking for food. But to get more pointedly to your question, so step number one is secure your garbage. First and foremost, that's typically the biggest problem spot. And there's a whole variety of ways to do that. There's bear resistant containers. You can keep your garbage in your closed garage so they don't have access. Some people even have garbage cans that maybe have a little chain and a lock that makes it bear resistant. But bottom line is secure your garbage one way or another. Number two, probably I would say, is bird feeders. Bears really like bird seed. That's a high calorie food source. I enjoy feeding birds as much as anybody, but my rule of thumb is when bears are active, my bird feeders are taken down.
And
I cheat.
Specific
go ahead.
months
Yeah,
for folks to keep up their bird feeders or take them down?
Sure. Rule of thumb is I put mine out mid-November and pull them mid-March with a little bit of wiggle room on either end, depending on that year's conditions. Based on some of the camera work I've done, I would say most bears are in the den by about the 10th of November. Okay. So that's, kind of ballpark. I do cheat a little bit in the summertime with hummingbird feeders because they, not that bears can't and won't get into those, but it seems to be less of an issue than with seed or suet feed. And it's a little bit trial and error. If you're going to put a hummingbird feeder out, you want to be really meticulous about cleanliness. Don't spill the sugar water on your deck, hose things down if you have a spill. Keep it really close to the house so bears are less likely to bump into it, if they're cruising by on the tree line or something. And I will confess, I have hummingbird feeders out most of hummingbird season, which for me is early April to, I usually try to phase them out by, say, early to mid-August. But that's one thing you can maybe get away with. But again, play it by ear. If bears start showing up, then take those hummingbird feeders down too. But to get back on topic, so let's see, garbage, birdseed, barbecues. A lot of people like to barbecue in the summer. Bears have one of the best noses in the animal kingdom. They can smell that burger from way far away. So when you're done with your barbecue, you want to clean it and ideally store it someplace like your garage where they don't have access to it. What else? What have we not covered? Oh, I know, important one. Pet foods. So don't leave a bowl of dog food out on your porch. If you've got to feed your dog outside, then do it. You sit there and watch your dog finish its meal and then take the bowl in. Don't just leave free feed out on the porch, whether it's for cats or dogs. Bears will smell that again from a long ways off and they will come eat it. And then the other thing, I got a laundry list, but the other two that I think are worth mentioning, just because I know these are common issues in the Valley, are beehives and chickens. So probably the best remedy in both of those cases is an electric fence. That's pretty effective at keeping bears out of trouble. I'll leave it there.
That's all very reasonable advice. And look for more information below on where to source some of those bear-proof products. Now you are working with the Conservancy, Defenders of Wildlife, Wastewise Methow, and private partners on a project called Methow Bear Aware that aims to build a community active in reducing human-bear conflict. What does a bear-aware Methow look like to you?
It looks like a community that's done a great job of removing those attractants that we just talked about. A community that's embracing the idea of living with bears. not just for the bears' sake, but also for their own enjoyment. I mean, bears are a popular game animal in this state, but they're also just a wonderful, watchful wildlife species. I mean, I think everybody in the valley's got their bear sighting story, and their face always lights up when they tell it. So, they're just fun critters to have around. If we just make what I consider to be a fairly modest effort to live with them, then we can enjoy them and stay out of trouble.
Well, I hope we get there one day, and I know we're working on it. And one of our first steps towards building that bear-friendly community is that we are trying to raise $15,000 to purchase 50 new bear-proof trash cans to go to some of these high conflict areas. Do you have any reasons why it is important for folks to support the purchasing of these cans, even if they personally do not receive one right away?
Sure, a couple of reasons come to mind right off the top of my head. The first is that, again, somebody else's problem bear or conflict bear can become your conflict bear if it just moves a little ways down the road or the street over. So by helping to prevent problems that we know are occurring, we're theoretically training those particular bears not to continue to come to residences to look for food. So you may be solving a problem that you didn't even know you were going to have by helping somebody else solve their existing problem. That's reason number one. Reason number two would be this initial effort to get these cans purchased is sort of the catalyst to get the program up and running. And then once it's up and running, it's going to essentially pay for itself. There's some costs built in that will buy new cans and expand the availability of those cans over time. So this initial phase is really important just to get the program rolling.
That's great. And for folks interested in supporting our efforts to get these 50 new cans, you can look below for more details on how to donate. You've been in the business of wildlife management and research here in the Methow a long time. What wildlife work in our region still gets you excited?
Yeah, my off the cuff answer is what doesn't get me excited. I honestly, I really enjoy almost every species I work with. I mean, the only thing I don't enjoy sometimes is the politics and some of this socio-political baggage that comes with some of these issues is a little tough to work through, but necessary. But from a species perspective, I mean, I've been doing deer surveys now, the same surveys for too many years, 25 years, 26 years, but I still get really excited about them. I just wound up my spring deer surveys and they were great. But I have kind of a special affinity for some of the carnivores, particularly some of the rarer carnivores, lynx and wolverine and wolves and, critters that are, well, I don't know, I guess they're charismatic megafauna to some degree, but they're just, again, they're carnivores with complex behaviors and I love them because they're just fascinating. But the other critter that always just puts a smile on my face, believe it or not, is when I get to work with snakes. And I make a point of working with John on rattlesnakes several days every summer. We just wrapped up a couple of days that as part of a podcast on the Wild podcast series with Chris Morgan that I'm not sure when that'll air, but we took Chris out and did some rattlesnake work. And I'm every time I see a snake on a road or trail, I stop and get it off the road and usually can't resist it unless it's a rattlesnake, picking it up and taking a look. And so that, I don't know. I'm a bit of a wildlife nerd, I guess. In my off time, I do wildlife related stuff quite often. It's just who I am.
Well, your excitement is infectious, and thank you so much for sharing your time and your expertise. And I know you're a big fan of wildlife cameras, and we weren't quite able to get some of your bear rub videos to work on this Zoom interview, but we are going to link to them below so folks can check those out. They're definitely a mood lifter, I would say.
Absolutely. When I'm having a bad day, all I do is put on a couple of those videos and it's immediately a better day. Yeah.
Awesome. So folks at home, just look below for more details on the Methow Bear Aware campaign. how you can support that, and some bear rub videos. Thank you, Scott, and thanks everyone for watching.
Thank you.